New Year's Eve, 2000. A man walks into one of Las Vegas's busiest casinos carrying a stack of crisp $100 bills. He's calm, focused, no entourage, no security, just confidence. His name is Dominic LoRiggio, a former software engineer from New York, known to a handful of insiders as the Dominator. The dealers recognize him. The pit bosses whisper, but they can't stop him because everything he's about to do is completely legal. He takes his place at the craps table. Within minutes, a crowd forms. He starts calling his shots before the dice even leave his hand. 6, 9, 10, over and over. For 45 minutes straight, he never rolls a 7, and this isn't luck. For years, he's been coming here almost every weekend, quietly walking into casinos across America, rolling the dice his way, and walking out with hundreds of thousands of dollars every time. Without cheating, without rigged dice, just pure control. Because what nobody in that room understands is that Dominic isn't gambling. He's using physics to beat the most powerful casinos in the world, and they can't do a thing about it. This is the story of the man who turned luck into a science and legally beat Las Vegas at its own game. New York, 1997. Dominic LoRiggio ran a small tech firm in Manhattan. During the week, he wrote software, managed clients, lived what most would call a normal life. Clean cut, steady income, quiet existence. But every Friday night, he caught a flight to Las Vegas. Dom wasn't a gambler in the traditional sense. He didn't come for the thrill or the rush or the complimentary drinks. He came because he found an edge. Blackjack, specifically card counting. It's not illegal, it's not cheating, it's just math. If you can track which cards have been played, you can predict slightly what's coming next. And that slight edge over hundreds of hands translates into consistent profit. For years, this worked. Dom would fly in on Saturday morning, play disciplined blackjack for the weekend, and fly home a few $1,000s richer, week after week, month after month. But then, the casinos adapted. They started using multiple decks, 6, sometimes 8, shuffled together, making counting exponentially harder. Then came automatic shufflers that continuously randomized the cards, eliminating any possibility of tracking what had been played. And the surveillance got sharper. Pit bosses trained to spot the telltale signs, bet variation, intense focus, the micro-expressions of someone doing mental arithmetic at high speed. Dom could feel it closing in. The edge was disappearing. Every trip to Vegas, the game got harder, the profit margins thinner, the scrutiny tighter. He faced a choice: quit gambling entirely, return to his ordinary life, or find a new game to beat. One evening, walking through the casino floor after another frustrating blackjack session, he heard something that made him stop. Shouting, laughter, the sound of pure, unfiltered joy. A group of women had gathered around the craps table. They were on a hot streak, winning hand after hand, screaming with excitement every time the dice landed in their favor. One of them picked up the dice, shook them dramatically near her ear like she was communicating with them, and hurled them down the table with wild, uncontrolled enthusiasm. The dice bounced everywhere, off the felt, careening into the back wall, tumbling chaotically before finally settling. Another win, more screaming. Dom had walked past craps tables 100 times before, never given them a second thought. It was the loud game, the chaotic game, the game where luck seemed to reign supreme. But standing there, watching this woman throw the dice with absolutely no technique, no control, no intention behind the motion, something occurred to him. In blackjack, the player doesn't touch the cards. In roulette, the player doesn't touch the wheel. In slots, the player doesn't touch the mechanism. But in craps, the player throws the dice. And if you're the one throwing them, what if you could control where they land? The thought lodged itself in his mind, all the way back to his hotel, on the flight home to New York, during the next week at work, sitting in front of his computer, supposedly focused on code. What if randomness wasn't as random as everyone assumed? The discovery. The next weekend, instead of flying to Vegas, Dom spent Saturday morning hitting every bookstore in Manhattan. He pulled books on craps, probability theory, physics, casino game design. Most of what he found was useless, betting systems that didn't work, superstitions dressed up as strategy, the same tired advice recycled across dozens of authors. But Dom wasn't looking for betting systems. He was looking for something nobody seemed to be writing about, whether the physical act of throwing dice could be controlled. Late that night, surrounded by books and printouts from physics forums, he started piecing it together. Craps operates on a simple mathematical foundation. 2 six-sided dice create 36 possible combinations. But those combinations aren't equal. Some numbers appear more frequently than others. 7, the most important number in craps, can be made 6 different ways: 1 6, 2 5, 3 4, and their reverses. 6 ways out of 36 possible combinations means 7 should appear statistically once every 6 rolls. That frequency is the bedrock of every bet on the table. It's what the casino counts on. In the long run, that 7 always appears, and when it does at the wrong time, the house wins. But Dom started asking a different question. What if the dice weren't truly random? What if, through technique and practice, you could alter that frequency? Not eliminate 7s, that would be impossible, but reduce them, from once every 6 rolls to once every 7 or 8. The 2% edge doesn't sound like much, but in gambling, it's the difference between slow bankruptcy and consistent profit. His friends thought he was losing his mind. Over dinner one night, he tried explaining the concept. One of them just laughed. "Dice are random, man. That's physics. The casino wouldn't offer the game if you could beat it." But Dom had spent years finding edges in systems that supposedly didn't have them. He knew that just because something was conventional wisdom didn't make it true. 3 weeks into his research, he found it. Buried in an obscure gambling book, a small advertisement. Precision Dice Shooting Seminar. Learn to control the dice. 2-day intensive training, Las Vegas. Instructor, Chris Paulicki. $595. $600, over $1,100 in today's money, for a weekend course taught by someone Dom had never heard of, who claimed he could teach people to do something most experts said was impossible. It could be a scam. Probably was a scam. Dom registered the next morning. 3 weeks later, he was sitting in a bland hotel conference room in Las Vegas with 9 other people and a regulation craps table set up in the center. Chris Paulicki didn't look like a gambling guru. Late 40s, wire-rimmed glasses, the demeanor of a high school physics teacher, which somehow made him more credible. He picked up 2 dice and asked the simple question: "How many of you have lost money playing craps?" Every hand in the room went up. Chris smiled. "Good, then you know what doesn't work. Now forget everything you think you know about throwing dice, because what I'm about to teach you isn't gambling, it's physics." Over the next 2 days, Chris broke down dice throwing into 3 fundamental components. First, the set, the way you position the dice before you throw them. Different configurations produce different probable outcomes. The hard ways set, where matching numbers face each other, mathematically reduces the combinations that form a 7. Second, the grip. How you hold the dice determines how they rotate in flight. Too much pressure and they stick to your fingers. Too little and they tumble chaotically. The goal is to minimize off-axis rotation, keeping the dice spinning cleanly on a single axis. Third, the throw. The most critical element, a perfect 45-degree arc, the angle that provides maximum distance with minimum force. The dice need to hit the back wall. Casino rules require it, but there's no rule about how hard they hit it. A soft touch, just enough contact to satisfy the requirement, not enough to destroy your control. It wasn't magic, it wasn't mysticism. It was biomechanics and physics applied to 2 small cubes. Chris demonstrated. His motion was smooth, controlled, almost lazy in its efficiency. The dice traveled in a low arc, kissed the back wall gently, barely bounced, and settled exactly where the math suggested they should. Dom spent 2 days practicing under Chris's supervision. The first 50 throws were disasters. Too much force, poor release points, the dice bouncing wildly despite his best intentions. But slowly, something started to click. The motion became smoother. The dice began landing with more consistency. On the last day, Chris pulled Dom aside. "You're getting it," he said quietly. "Most people who take this course never really get it, but you've got the mindset." He handed Dom a business card. Just a phone number, nothing else. "I work with a small group, very small. We play together, pool our bankroll, and we win, consistently. I call it Rosebud. If you're interested, call me in a month, after you've practiced." Dom flew home that Sunday with more questions than answers. Could this actually work? Was Chris legitimate? Or was he just another desperate gambler chasing a fantasy? There was only one way to find out. In the corner of his garage, Dom built a makeshift craps table. Plywood base, green felt, foam pyramids glued to the back wall to simulate casino conditions. And he practiced. 3 hours a day, every single day. After work, before bed, weekend mornings, late into the night when he couldn't sleep. At first, it felt hopeless. The dice seemed to mock him, bouncing randomly no matter how carefully he set them or how smoothly he threw. But Dom was nothing if not disciplined. He tracked every throw in a spreadsheet, thousands of data points, and slowly, over weeks, his distribution began to shift. Sevens appear less than 1 in 6 times, then less than 1 in 7. 6 weeks after the seminar, Dom picked up the phone and called Chris. 2 days later, he was standing in Chris's garage in front of a professional-grade craps table with 3 other men watching him throw dice. This was Team Rosebud. The training. Chris Paulicki didn't run a casual operation. Rosebud wasn't a group of weekend gamblers hoping to get lucky. It was a disciplined team with strict protocols, and Chris made the rules clear from the beginning. Rule 1. They pooled their bankroll. Everyone contributed equally. Everyone got paid equally. It didn't matter if you were hot or cold on a given night. The team won or lost together. Rule 2. Modest stakes. $50, maybe $75 per bet maximum. They were there to grind out consistent profits over time, not make a scene or chase big scores. Rule 3. No showboating. No celebrating. No calling attention to yourself. The moment casino security noticed you were winning consistently, your advantage was over. Break any of these rules, you were out. Dom agreed to all of it, at least that's what he said. For the next 3 months, he trained with Rosebud every weekend. Chris's garage became a classroom, the craps table, a laboratory. They drilled him on every aspect of the game, different dice sets for different situations. The come-out roll required one approach, setting for 7 because 7 was your friend in that phase. But once a point was established, everything changed. 7 became the enemy, and the dice needed to be set to avoid it. Speed was critical. In a real casino, you couldn't take 30 seconds to position the dice. That drew attention. Dom learned to set the dice in under 5 seconds while maintaining precision. They taught him how to read the table, to recognize when the felt was playing fast or slow, when the back wall had more or less give. Casinos weren't uniform. Every table had its own personality, and a good shooter adapted. And they taught him discipline. Dom's natural instinct was to press his advantage when he was hot, increase his bets, maximize profit. But Jerry Patterson, one of Rosebud's founding members, a former military officer with zero tolerance for ego, shut that down hard. "You think you're smarter than the casino," Jerry told him during one training session. "You're not. You're just slightly less predictable. The moment you start acting like you've beaten them, they'll crush you." The message was clear. Stay humble, stay invisible, stay profitable. In March of 1998, Dom made his first trip to Atlantic City with the team. He'd thrown dice thousands of times in practice, had the motion memorized, the sets internalized, the grip perfected. But walking up to a real craps table, with real money on the line, with security cameras tracking every movement, with pit bosses watching for any irregularity, that was different. The first 30 minutes were a disaster. His hands shook, the dice slipped, his throws were too hard, too soft, too wild. Every carefully practiced motion fell apart under the pressure. Chris stood behind him at the rail, calm as ever. "Breathe. You know how to do this. Just throw." Gradually, Dom's nerves settled. The muscle memory kicked in. His throws began landing with the consistency he'd achieved in practice. And then something remarkable happened. He started winning. Not every roll, not even most rolls, but enough. The distribution was shifting exactly as the theory predicted. 7s appear less frequently, point numbers hitting more often. The other players at the table began to notice. A small crowd gathered. People started placing their bets in sync with Dom's throws, riding his streak. 2 hours later, the team walked away with $4,000. It wasn't a fortune. Split 4 ways, Dom's share was $1,000, but it was proof. The technique worked. Over the next 6 months, Rosebud traveled to Atlantic City, Biloxi, and Las Vegas. They played conservatively, never at the same casino twice in one weekend, never staying at the table longer than an hour, never betting large enough to trigger serious scrutiny. On average, they grew their bankroll by 60% per weekend. Steady, consistent, boring even. And that's where Dom's frustration began. He was the strongest shooter on the team. His skill level had surpassed even Chris's. On a good night, Dom could roll for 20, sometimes 30 minutes without hitting a 7, far beyond what random chance would allow. But because of Rosebud's rules, he was locked into small bets, winning a few $1,000s when he knew mathematically that he could be winning tens of thousands. He was pulling in the same work as everyone else, contributing the same money to the pot, but his skill level was carrying the team, and his payout was identical to players who couldn't throw half as well. Chris sensed the tension, but held firm. This isn't about individual glory, it's about sustainability. We're building something that lasts. Dom nodded, said he understood, but the resentment was growing. Then, in the fall of 1998, Chris invited a guest to one of their training sessions, a man named Frank Scoboletti, a published author, a recognized authority on casino gambling, someone whose name actually meant something in the gambling world. Frank watched the team practice for an hour, polite, interested, taking notes. And then Dom stepped up to the table for his turn. What happened next would change everything. Dom set the dice, threw, point established. He threw again and again. 10 rolls, 20 rolls, 30 rolls without hitting a 7. Frank's expression shifted from polite interest to genuine shock. He'd seen skilled craps players before. He'd written about advantage play. But this was something else. After the session ended, Frank pulled Dom aside. "How much have you made using this technique?" he asked. Dom did the math in his head. 6 months of weekends, conservative bets, pooled bankroll. "Maybe 10, 12,000 total," he said. Frank stared at him. "You're joking." "That's how the team operates. Small stakes, everyone shares equally." Frank shook his head slowly. "You're sitting on a gold mine and you're digging with a spoon." He let that hang in the air for a moment. "What if," Frank said carefully, "you didn't have to play by their rules? What if you could bet the way your skill level deserves?" Dom didn't say anything, but Frank could see the idea taking root. 4 weeks later, Frank called with a proposal. Form a new team, just the two of them, no arbitrary betting limits, no forced humility. Play the way winners play, bold, confident, maximizing profit when the advantage is there. They'd call it Golden Touch. Dom knew what saying yes meant. He'd be betraying Chris, who taught him everything, walking away from Jerry and the others who'd welcomed him into Rosebud. But he also knew he'd outgrown them. He made the call. Chris took the news quietly. No anger, just disappointment. "You're making a mistake," he said. "Not because of the money, because of the heat. The way you want to play, Vegas will eat you alive." Dom thanked him for everything, and meant it, but he was done playing small. The Rebellion. New Year's Eve, 1999, Las Vegas Strip. Dominic LoRiggio and Frank Scoboletti walked into the Mirage with a $20,000 bankroll and a plan to announce their arrival. No more $50 bets, no more invisible grinding. Golden Touch was playing to win big. Dom approached the craps table with $500 in chips. In Rosebud terms, that was reckless. In Dom's mind, that was finally playing at his skill level. He set the dice. The motion was the same as always, smooth, controlled, precise. But this time, when he won, he didn't maintain a poker face. He smiled, slapped hands with Frank, let himself enjoy it. The table filled up quickly. Other players recognized a hot shooter when they saw one, and everyone wanted to ride the wave. Dom rolled for 45 minutes straight, not a single 7. The pit boss watched from a distance, arms crossed, expression unreadable. He'd seen lucky streaks before, but this wasn't the body language of someone getting lucky. This was control. When Dom finally 7'd out, he'd won $27,000. In today's money, roughly $50,000. Frank was grinning ear to ear. Dom was buzzing with adrenaline. For the first time since he'd started this journey, he felt like he was truly beating the house. They played Vegas, Atlantic City, Biloxi, Reno. Different cities, different casinos, same result. Golden Touch wasn't grinding out modest profits. They were taking serious money. 5 figures every weekend. Dom's bankroll grew exponentially, and his confidence grew with it. He started calling his shots before the dice landed. Hard 8, he'd say, and throw double 4s. The crowd would erupt. He'd flash a smile, soak in the attention. Everything Rosebud had warned him not to do, he was doing. And for a while, it worked beautifully. But the casinos were noticing. In Vegas, the casino industry is small and interconnected. Pit bosses talk to each other. Security teams share information. If you're winning big at the Bellagio on Friday night, Caesars knows about it by Saturday morning. Photos of Dom and Frank started circulating internally. Not officially banned, they hadn't done anything illegal, but flagged. Persons of interest. Staff were briefed. These two show up, watch them closely. The first sign of trouble came at a table at the MGM Grand. Dom was in the middle of a hot streak when the stickman, the dealer who controls the dice, was suddenly replaced mid-roll. The new stickman was older, harder, and he had one job: disrupt Dom's rhythm. He started talking during Dom's setup, making unnecessary comments, moving the dice in ways that forced Dom to adjust his grip. Dom adapted, stayed focused, kept winning. The stickman tried something else. As Dom reached for the dice, the stickman accidentally tapped Dom's hand with the stick. Small jab, barely noticeable to anyone watching, but enough to throw off the precise timing Dom relied on. Dom looked up, met the stickman's eyes. The message was clear: we know what you're doing. Still, Dom won that session, walked away up $15,000. But the game had changed. It wasn't just about skill anymore, it was about psychological warfare. The casinos couldn't ban them, not without proof of cheating, which didn't exist, but they could make life uncomfortable, difficult, stressful. At another casino, a pit boss stood directly behind Dom while he shot, close enough that Dom could feel his presence, close enough to be intimidating. At another, the back wall padding was adjusted mid-session, changing how the dice bounced. Small sabotages that technically weren't against any rules, but made controlled throwing harder. Frank started to worry. Maybe we're pushing too hard. Maybe we should dial it back. But Dom was in too deep. The money was incredible. The thrill of beating them at their own game in front of crowds with casino management watching helplessly, that was addictive in a way that money wasn't. Chris's warning echoed in his mind sometimes late at night. The moment you start acting like you've beaten them, they'll crush you. But he pushed the thought away. He hadn't come this far to play scared. Summer of 2000. Dominic LoRiggio's name was now whispered in casino surveillance rooms across Nevada. Not banned, not barred, but watched. Always watched. Golden Touch had won hundreds of thousands of dollars over the past year. Conservative estimate, Dom had personally cleared more than he'd made in 5 years as a software developer. The atmosphere had changed. Every time he approached the craps table now, the energy shifted. Pit bosses materialized from nowhere. Stickmen who'd been friendly to other players turned cold and mechanical with him. In one casino, he was shooting well, 20 minutes into a roll, up $12,000, when the casino manager approached and, in front of the entire table, said loudly, "We're adjusting the table. Maintenance issue." They forced everyone to leave, changed the felt, adjusted the back wall. 30 minutes later, the table reopened. The message couldn't have been clearer. You're not welcome here. At another venue, something more direct happened. Dom was mid-throw when the stickman jabbed him, harder this time, not even pretending it was accidental. The stick caught Dom's wrist just as he released. The dice flew wild, bounced chaotically, sevened out. Dom looked up, furious. The stickman stared back, blank-faced, daring him to complain. What was Dom going to say? That the dealer had interfered with his controlled throw? That would be admitting he was using a technique. Frank put a hand on Dom's shoulder. "Walk away. It's not worth it." They cashed out, left. That night, Frank was more serious than Dom had ever seen him. "We need to talk about whether this is sustainable," Frank said. "They're not going to let us keep doing this." Dom knew he was right, but he also knew he wasn't done. Late September 2000, Saturday night, Vegas Strip. Dom and Frank walked into one of the major casinos knowing full well their photos had been circulated, knowing they were marked. But there were no legal grounds to refuse them service, and Dom wanted to make one more statement. The craps table was moderately busy when they arrived. Dom bought in for $7,000. In chips, that's a substantial stack, impossible not to notice. The pit bosses noticed immediately, picked up the phone, spoke quietly into it. Within 5 minutes, additional security had positioned themselves around the perimeter. Not obvious. There. Dom set the dice. The table quieted. Even strangers could sense something significant was happening. He threw. Point established. 8. He threw again. 9. Again. 6. Again. 4. 10 minutes in, a crowd had formed. 20 people deep, pressing against the rail to watch. The pit boss ordered the stickman replaced. Third time that night. The new stickman was older than the others, face like granite. He took his position and looked directly at Dom, held his gaze for a long moment. Then, barely above a whisper but long enough for Dom to hear, "You're a dead man." The words hung in the air, not a literal threat, casinos don't operate that way, but a message. Your time here is over. Dom felt his heart rate spike, adrenaline dumping into his system. This was the moment where most people would walk away, cash out, take the hint. Instead, Dom smiled. He was rolling for 40 minutes now. The crowd was massive, people cheering every throw. Other players were winning big, riding his streak. The pit boss couldn't shut it down, not with this many people watching, not with cameras from the casino floor broadcasting to the entire property, not without creating a scene that would raise questions. Dom was untouchable for the moment. His point was 10. In a move that Frank later called either brilliant or insane, Dom looked directly at the stickman and said loud enough for everyone to hear, $100, hard 10, one roll. A hard 10 meant double fives, no 4-6 combination, just fives. The odds were 30-1. The table fell silent. The stickman's jaw tightened, but he couldn't refuse the bet. Dom pushed the chips forward. Dom set the dice, 5 facing up on each side, the hard ways set. He breathed, once, twice. The throw was perfect, textbook execution. The dice left his hand in a clean arc, traveled the length of the table with minimal rotation, kissed the back wall softly, bounced once, settled. 5 and 5. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Then the entire table erupted. Strangers were hugging. The crowd behind the rail was screaming. Even other dealers and nearby tables stopped to look. Dom didn't celebrate. He just locked eyes with the stickman and waited. The stickman's face was stone, but his hands moved mechanically, pushing $3,000 in chips across the table to Dom. In that moment, Dominic LoRiggio had done what every gambler dreams of, beaten the house publicly, with the house knowing exactly what he was doing, and there was nothing they could do about it. He collected the chips, tipped the dealers, heavily because he wasn't a monster, and walked away. Frank was quiet as they cashed out. $27,000, roughly $50,000 in today's money, in 1 hour. In the back taxi to their hotel, Frank finally spoke. That was incredible, and incredibly stupid. Dom knew he was right. Dom stared out the window at the passing neon. Part of him felt triumphant, part of him felt empty. He'd proven his point, but in doing so, he'd also proven theirs. You can't beat the house, not because the game can't be beaten, Dom had proven it could, but because the house doesn't have to play fair. They control the environment, they make the rules, and when someone gets too good, they simply remove them from the equation. Legal, quiet, permanent. Over the next 2 years, Golden Touch continued playing, but the landscape had fundamentally changed. Dom and Frank were effectively blacklisted from most major Vegas properties. Not officially, there was no bulletin, no public statement, but their names were known, their faces recognized. Some casinos would let them play briefly before a pit boss would materialize with a polite but firm request. "Sir, we're going to have to ask you to play a different game." Others wouldn't even let them approach the craps tables. No explanation, no appeal, just done. They adapted. Smaller casinos, Indian gaming facilities, regional markets where their reputation hadn't spread. The money was still good, not $50,000 sessions, but consistent 5-figure weekends. Dom taught seminars. Dozens of students paid thousands of dollars to learn his technique. Some of them got good, most didn't. The ones who did often learned the same hard lesson Dom had. Even if you can beat the game, the casino can still beat you. Chris Paulicki's warning had proven prophetic. Sustainability mattered more than spectacular wins. But Dom had gotten what he wanted. He'd proven dice control wasn't a myth. He'd made more money than he'd ever made as a software developer. And he'd beaten Vegas at its own game, even if only temporarily. Today, more than 2 decades later, Dom is still around. Still plays according to people who know him, but quietly now. Different names sometimes, different appearance, always moving, never staying long enough to draw attention. The casinos won that war, but not before he won some battles. The question that started this whole journey, whether randomness could be controlled, has an answer now. Yes, but barely, and only if you're willing to sacrifice everything else for it. Chris Paulicki was right about the physics, Jerry Patterson was right about the discipline, and Dom was right that the edge existed. But they were all wrong about one thing, that this was about beating the house. It was never really about the house. It was about proving that in a world built on chance, skill could still matter, that chaos could be tamed, That one person with enough dedication and discipline could bend reality, just slightly, in their favor. For a little while, at least.